What's up, y'all? It's Super Stinson. Everything's not fine. So we're gonna be doing wansee entertainment. We ain't got to it since a month. The top video that was this one, the 3 true scary story animation. But this is true, scary, strange. Okay, cool. So we're gonna go all the way up there. I know it's a lot. But when I saw True Ass Girlfriend, so I was like, yeah, that made me want to start doing this. Cause I'm like, yeah, it's a lot, but it's like 110. I gotta do school, so it's a lot of stuff I gotta do. So, yup.
Make your photos dance with the rhythm.
This is the moment. Tonight is the night. We'll fight till it's over. So we put our hands.
Copyright. Yeah. It's an old song.
This happened to me and my friends about 20 years ago. I'm now a 38-year-old female. I live in Tennessee and we have a place here called Little Egypt. It's basically a swimming hole and me and my friends had been there like 1,000,000 times at night. It was the middle of summer and the country fair was in town. Me and my twin sister and 2 of our friends had went and hung out like normally teenagers do. We had ran into our mom's stepdad and little sister while we were at the fair, and we had told our mom that we were going to Little Egypt to goof off, as we had done that a lot during the summer. I remember she specifically told me and my twin sister not to go down there that late because, anything could happen. We were 18 years old at the time, and of course, you don't usually listen to your parents much at that age. So we just told her she was crazy and that nothing would happen to us. We waited till around midnight, and we decided to go to the swimming hole. It was me and my friend Lisa in one car, and my twin sister and our friend Heather in another car. Now, when you get to the swimming hole, it's out in the woods, probably about 10 minutes from any civilization, and nowhere to turn around unless you go up on the road. We then pull in and we get out of the cars, and we're still standing pretty closely to the cars, because we hadn't gotten out our flashlights and stuff that we were going to take with us. I start to walk towards the car my twin sister was standing at, and all of a sudden we hear some sticks breaking. I then look at my sister and softly said, "Did you hear that?" She replied back with yes, and that maybe it was Lisa messing with us. We then tell Lisa to quit trying to scare us and that it really isn't funny. Lisa then says that she didn't do it. Then all of a sudden out of nowhere, we hear a lot of sticks breaking. My sister and Heather then jump back into their car, and I ran to Lisa's car. We barely managed to jump in her car in time. Now, she has automatic seatbelts, and it nearly broke my damn shoulder getting in so fast. I don't really know how we got the cars turned around in that little space we had, but when we did so, I kid you not, there was about 6 guys dressed in black head to toe with masks on that then jumped out of the woods right where we were parked at. They also had baseball bats, and they were chasing after us. About 3 days later, we decided to go back down there, and there was police crime tape all over the place. We also saw some other people there, and we asked them what happened. They said some guy got beaten to death about 3 nights ago, which also happened to be the same exact night that the other 6 guys had jumped out on us. I'm really thankful that we managed to get away when we did. But my heart really breaks for the guy that lost his life that night. This world really is crazy.
Wow, that's messed up though, to be honest. Because that is messed up if you get beat up like that. That's just crazy right there. Okay, so we got a lot of more to go. So we had watched that. I gotta remember.
Oh my god, this slime is so real.
At that app, you realize I do that. That's so
It happened 3 years ago. On Saturday afternoon, I was hanging out with my friends, Austin, Vincent, Charlie, and Bobby, while my parents were gone for the weekend.
I really don't.
We were playing Battlefield 1 at Austin's house, chilling and having a good time. A couple of hours later, we got bored and had nothing to do. So we went for a walk on the boardwalk, talking about what our plans are going to be for the summer.
I know it was so funny.
Vincent said he'll be going to Los Angeles with his family for a month. And Charlie will be in Arizona for 2 weeks. For Bobby, he'll be in London for a month. And I was going to Ocean City for a week. After we had a small chat, Austin asked me if we could go to the abandoned hospital around here.
Stupid.
Being frightened, I was thinking that it wouldn't be a good idea to go there. However, I didn't want them to think of me as a chicken, so I agreed and decided to go there. And so did my friends. The outside was getting dark. We got into my truck and drove almost an hour to reach that destination. When we finally got there, I parked my truck right just next to the entrance, in case anything happens while we're checking out the hospital. We slowly got inside the hospital. The hallways and other rooms were empty. At first, I thought it was a little bit creepy and chilly inside. About 20 minutes later, walking around, we suddenly heard something that made our hearts drop. It was the sound of a girl screaming, saying, "Help! Somebody help me!"
Don't do it.
Then I heard some guy saying, "Shut your mouth," with a rough voice.
Dang.
We decided to follow the sound. When we went all the way up the stairs and got there, the dim light was coming from the room. I told my friends not to move a muscle while I was slowly approaching and peeking through
Why
the
you
room.
moving a muscle?
And what I saw was just unbelievable. A girl was taped around her legs, arms behind her back, and even her mouth now. I quietly told my friends to come to the room. I didn't see the other guy, so we quickly approached her, releasing the tape around her. "Thank you, guys," she said. "What's your name and what happened?" I asked her, and she replied, "My name is Hannah. I was kidnapped by a man 3 weeks ago while I was coming home from college." Then I asked again, "What does he look like?" "I think he's mid-40s. He has black hair and he's chubby looking." She replied back, and after she gave me the details, we decided to help her escape and get back to my truck. However, we saw a movement suddenly coming from the stairway with a lighting candle. Fortunately, we found an empty dark room at that moment and hid there. And not long after, I could see a figure wearing a flannel shirt, jeans, boots, who came into the room. He was holding a big machete.
Oh, I'm good.
I was positive that creepy man was the one Hannah was talking about.
I thought he was holding a bed or something.
After the man passed the room where we were hiding, we got out of the room quietly without making a sound as possible as we could. We were about to get to the exit. All of a sudden, a loud scream was heard from upstairs. "You! Where the heck are you? I'm going to kill you." My heart pounded so hard.
He didn't have a machete.
We had no choice but just to make a run toward my truck as soon as possible. All of my friends jumped in the back of my truck, and then I quickly started the engine. As I started the engine, Austin gave a big shriek. "Holy shit, Matt, get the heck out of here right now!" I then looked behind us, and there he was. The guy was chasing after us with his big machete in his hand, and I quickly drove off. While one of my friends called the police, we pulled up at the gas station waiting for the cops to show up. They arrived in about 10 minutes. We told them exactly what happened tonight, and after we informed them where the hospital was, they went over to investigate the case. They eventually caught the man soon. He was taken into custody, and after that, got charged with kidnapping and attempted murder. After the police took him away, they told us they'd been searching for this man for 5 years. They also told us that he had prior convictions from the past of raping women and other kidnapping charges. And the poor Hannah, The ambulance took her to the hospital, and then we all came back to our house. After that day, we decided to never go to such places like that again. I still can't stop thinking about what would have happened if we failed to escape. Also, what would have happened to Hannah if we didn't show up? We all might be dead. I will never forget that night.
Well, Shady can take her head off. I ain't lying.
Hello?
This is Justin Bieber.
Oh my god!
Just calm down.
I was trying to click on that. I was trying to click on something else. I'm bad.
My name is Bree. This happened in 2016. I was 19 years old at the time. I was up late the night before into the early morning studying, and I hadn't had much sleep, so I had just woken up from a nap. I decided to hop in the shower to wake myself. That's when I heard this weird scraping sound coming from somewhere outside. I stopped the shower and peered out from behind the curtain, and then made my way over to the window. I saw nothing, but I could still hear the noise. I thought it may have been my neighbor working in a shed, so I ignored the disturbance and finished up in the shower. Before I continue, I should inform you that I have severe anxiety problems, and I often get a little paranoid sometimes. It also doesn't help that I have PTSD as well. Anyways, I was now back in my room, and I took a seat on my bed. I texted my then boyfriend and asked him what he wanted for dinner. While I was waiting for him to respond, I just relaxed and scrolled through my Facebook.
I'm not even gonna lie. I hate when the boys play for the girl character. Because when they say my boyfriend, that sounds gay.
I was reading an article about the recent clown sightings that were happening at the time, when I was interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming from outside. I stopped and listened carefully. I heard a few more steps, followed by a tapping noise. I was a bit confused by this. It hadn't yet occurred to me that I had an unwelcomed guest outside. I was thinking why my boyfriend hadn't knocked on the door or called before he showed up. We usually had a routine with things like this, especially if I was home alone. He would either text, call, or FaceTime me to let me know when he was on his way home, or if he was at the door, because there had been a lot of shady activity around our neighborhood at the time. I then called out to him, and suddenly, all fell silent. I texted him and asked if he was at the door. There was no reply, so I decided to peek through the bedroom window. While I was making my way to the other side of the room, my phone started ringing. It was my boyfriend wanting to FaceTime. When I answered, he said he was about 15 minutes away. As I was talking to him, I pulled back the curtains of my bedroom window, and that's when all the blood in my veins turned to ice as I came face to face with a fucking clown. I know I wasn't hallucinating. An actual clown was looking at me through the window, smiling. After my initial shock, I actually started to laugh, thinking that this had to be some kind of prank my boyfriend was pulling on me. So I played along, pretending to be terrified, and whispered into the phone, "Very funny, asshole. Love the whole scary clown thing." I chuckled and rolled my eyes. My boyfriend was confused, and I explained to him about the clown at the window, and said that he and his friend did a good job scaring the piss out of me. He seemed confused, saying that all of his friends were hanging out at the pub, and that he was not a part of any plan to prank me. Upon hearing this, I felt my stomach in my throat as I looked back at the clown, who was still just outside my window. He reached into his costume and pulled out a very real-looking butcher's knife. By this point, I wasn't sure what was going on, so I grabbed my baseball bat. My boyfriend told me that he was now only a few minutes away. He shouted at me to stay inside and to lock all the doors and windows. I quickly closed the curtains and went into the lounge. It wasn't long before I heard a loud pounding on the front door.
Have you ever wondered what it would be like to play Grand Theft Auto 5, Fortnite, or even Red Dead Redemption 2 on your mobile phone? Well,
suddenly I heard a creepy voice coming from the other side.
Let me in, child.
I didn't respond to the voice. I just stood perfectly still, waiting for the next move. Loud pounding rang out again, causing the door to rattle on its hinges, but I kept quiet, even when I heard the doorknob rattling. Although I was pretty scared at this point, I was also getting a tad irritated and yelled out to the clown, "Fuck off! Go annoy someone else." I then heard a muffled laughter, followed by the creepy voice.
Now that's the arrow.
Please let me in, doll. I just want to play. I want to play with your insides.
I had enough of this. I was about to go out and confront this creepy asshole myself when I heard my boyfriend's voice, who was still on the phone, say, "Hang up and call the cops." After some consideration, I thought that maybe confronting the creepy clown outside with a butcher's knife was not the correct course of action. So I did as my boyfriend said. I left the lounge and was soon explaining to the police dispatcher the situation. I was on my way back to my room when I heard the sound of glass breaking. I stopped in my tracks and told them that I think the clown just broke into the house. They immediately told me to get somewhere safe, and that's when I heard my ex yelling out, "Hey, what the fuck are you doing? Get the hell out of here. The police are on the way." The clown just bellowed out a psychotic laugh and took off. As I made my way back into the bedroom, something caught my eye. I peered out the window. Through a gap in the curtains, I saw another clown. He appeared to be holding some kind of saw blade in his hand. I went to move, but I was like a deer caught in the headlights. I couldn't move or scream. Fear then overcame me, as I realized my boyfriend was now out there with 2 creepy clowns. I screamed into the phone, "There's another clown outside my bedroom. Please hurry." After a few moments, I was relieved when I heard my boyfriend at the back door. I quickly let him inside. We then held each other tightly until the police arrived. After taking our statements, the police discovered a rusted hacksaw and an axe lying on the ground outside of my
For some reason, I had a feeling like the dad was gonna get stabbed.
bedroom window.
I had a feeling
There were red marks all over them. Of course, the creepy clowns that had turned my night into a freak show were nowhere to be found. After that night, I struggled to fall asleep. I often think to myself, what would have happened to me if I had been stupid enough to open that door? Were they just a couple of thrill seekers looking to frighten a girl who was all alone? Or were they, in fact, out for blood?
Think a second. Copyright. Let me try to get me copyright. The voice in
Orange Theory, let's turn it up.
Welcome to the best hour of your day. It is time.
It's always got
A few years ago, it was in January. It was so cold that our town was all frozen, and the streets were very quiet back then. I was living on the second floor of the apartment building at that time, and I could see a small park and a bench in the direction of my balcony. One night, it was around 9 p.m. My cell battery had just died, so I went near the balcony to pick up my charger, and I saw a child sitting on a bench about 30 meters away. It was snowing heavily outside at the time, so I thought it was a little weird for a child to sit on a bench alone in the middle of the night, especially on this cold day. However, I soon decided not to care about him, thinking that he's just waiting for his parents. Then I surfed the website for a while, and it was about 12 a.m. I went back to the balcony to lock the window, and that kid, he was still sitting on the bench. Looking at the back of his head, I began to worry that something might be wrong with him. So, after thinking about it for a long time, I posted a post on the website I often go. Guys, There's a child out there in this time. Should I call the police? I then looked back at the bench. Maybe I can talk to him for a second. Thinking like this, I opened the window and shouted at the child. Hey! Hey, kid! He seemed not to hear my voice. He was just sitting there, not even looking at me. I shouted to him a few more times, then gave up. Went back to the living room, checking the comments, and there was one comment caught in my eyes. Hey, listen, that is not a human. Just shut the door and go to sleep. Do not talk to him. I got goosebumps. I slowly went out to the balcony again, and to my surprise, the child was gone. Was he a real ghost, or just gone somewhere? Thinking like this, I tried to shut the window that I had left open earlier, and looked down at the window inadvertently. And there was a child. He was standing in front of the first floor, still turning back. Holding my breath, I got so surprised that I quickly closed the window and locked it completely to the inner door. However, I ended up staying up all night that day. Eventually, nothing happened that day, but I still think it's the weirdest experience of my life. What if I didn't see his comment at that moment? Wouldn't that ghost have come into my house through the window? Of course, that kid may be a real person, but I still can't forget the back of his head.
He in your house. He in there. He in your house. He said he finna get
With the current.
Alright.
Create your future as an animator. Immerse yourself in visual effects, character animation, and
I currently live in South Korea, and this story is about my experience. I used to suffer from nightmares without any reason during my freshman midterm exam. At first, I couldn't remember my dream well when I woke up and just thought it was because of stress, as it was the middle of the exam period. However, the nightmare continued on even after the exam, and it became clearer, so I remembered it vividly in the end. And the weird thing was not just that. Exactly 4 dreams kept repeating. In the first dream, I grab a woman in hanbok from a large hanok-style house and drag her down to the front yard. Then I beat her. Second, the same woman is crying on the ground, and I pull her hair and drag her to the well at the end of the yard. Third, the woman cries with her face covered with tears and blood and begs me in front of the well, "For mercy's sake, please forgive me." Then the person who seems to be me stares at her, and then I laugh and push her into the well. Lastly, it is the strangest and the most ominous dream. I can hear a woman's voice, but all I see is a well in front of me. I approach the well, and there's a woman smiling with tears in her eyes, and she bursts out laughing and keeps on saying this: "Slow and steady wins the game." What a joy. I couldn't sleep well while I had these 4 nightmares over and over again all month long. So one day, I ended up going to a fortune teller. After he listened to my story, he said it would be more helpful to experience my past life than to interpret my dream. Half uneasiness and half doubts, I started to experience my past life. And surprisingly, it overlapped with my dream. In my past, I was a woman, and I had a maid whose name was Sion. My appearance was not exceptional, and I wasn't talented, while Sion was beautiful and had many talents. Then one day, I heard from the people who seemed to be my parents that they wanted to make Sion marry someone after lying about her being their daughter instead of me. I got angry when I heard that, and the next day I grabbed Sion's hair and threw her into the front yard as soon as my parents went to the other house to discuss marriage. For no reason, she started to beg me. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry." It made me angrier, so I stomped on Sion's body violently and beat her in the face until she was covered in blood. Then her clothes slipped down, and I could see a big bruise on her belly. When Sion fell on the floor and sobbed without moving, I then grabbed her hair and headed for the well at the end of the yard. She cried and cried out for help, but I ignored it and pushed her into the well. Finally, I went back into the room and locked the door. My past life experience just ended that way. I think it would be better for you to visit her. After experiencing my past life, he introduced me to a shaman. Usually, I didn't believe that kind of stuff, and especially hated shaman stuff. But he continued. The shaman is originally a doctor. People who suffer from ghosts or spirits come to them, just as sick people are treated by doctors. But money makes people do some crazy things. So the next day, I visited the shaman with my friend. And when I started talking about my dreams and past life experiences, she suddenly laughed at me. She laughed frantically that her teeth were all exposed. But then she suddenly looked serious. Her expression was so creepy that I sat still without saying anything. Then she said, "Slow and steady wins the game. You have killed her and enjoyed your life, and you haven't even collected her body. How cruel you were. She won the game." She glared at me.
I know I was late like a minute.
But then looked up into the air and suddenly started to drop tears. Poor thing. How scary and sad she would have been. She muttered for a long time, then asked me again, suddenly with a startled look. "Do you have a baby who will be born soon?" Suddenly, I remembered that my aunt had a month left before childbirth and that I had bought her baby shoes. I was so surprised that my eyes were wide open and stared at her. And this time, she banged the desk and asked again, "The baby, am I right?" Now, being scared of this situation, I cried and nodded. Then the shaman said, "No, you're in big trouble. It's too late. You should have killed the baby." When she spoke to herself, my friend asked, "No way. Why do they have to kill the baby? Why?" This woman killed people in her past life. That wasn't enough. She threw her in the well and enjoyed her life. Her anger and resentment have piled up over and over, and now she came to her. I couldn't understand what the shaman said, so me and my friend were thinking for a long time, and she yelled again, "She will come back as a baby. Now listen to me. Do not stay with the baby after it's born. You must never be with her until her first birthday." "Why?" my friend asked. She then sighed and replied, "The baby remembers the past." After that, we left the shaman's house and went home saying that she was a freak or something like that. However, surprisingly, I no longer had nightmares after I met her. After a month and a little longer, my cousin was born. And a few days later, I visited my aunt with my mother. When she asked my aunt what her child's name was, she smiled and answered. At that moment, my heart sank with her words. "It's Sion." My mother-in-law went to the naming center for her first grandchild, and they told her to name her Sion. Then she will do well and have a healthy life. That's what they told her. I thought it was just a coincidence, but my uncle next to me laughed and said, "But hey, you know what's interesting? She has a big mole on her belly." At first, I thought something was stained, so I tried to erase it, but it wasn't that. Then, as he lifted up the baby's clothes and showed her belly, I collapsed on the floor. It reminded me of the woman's bruise I saw in my past life. I told my mom that I would go first because I wasn't feeling well and left the hospital right away. After that, I explained everything to my mom when she arrived home. She just laughed at me at first, but it seemed like she thought about my story. So she took me to a temple the next day. A monk took me and my mother to the sermon hall, and we both performed a memorial ceremony for a few days for a woman named Sion, with a sincere apology. I felt sorry for my aunt, but I had to contact her only by phone and text until the baby's first birthday party. About 2 months later, I had a dream. A woman came to me, and I could see she was crying. After I woke up, I called the shaman I had visited before, and she said,
Dang,
"Okay,
that's a good story.
everything is over. You'll be fine." Frankly speaking, I still don't have the courage to see my baby cousin, but hope I can smile at her and see her face someday.
Dang. Alright. We're gonna get into one more. The thing I saw in the cave. Alright, that's one.
I'm from Afghanistan. My family relocated to France in 2003, shortly after the American invasion. I was only 12 years old when it all started. Between 2001 and 2003, armed terrorists would intrude into our home and use it as a headquarters to plot attacks against the invading army. My father suffered from a genetic disease that would eventually take the use of his arms and legs. This is why I think the Taliban chose to hold up in our home. There would be no resistance. The first time they burst through our doors, it was horrifying for me and my 2 younger sisters. But eventually we got used to waking up and seeing armed men in our living room. About a year after the war broke out, following the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York, the Taliban would begin to raid small villages like mine, looking for recruits to replace the fighters that were killed in combat.
I'm sorry, y'all, my bad. But, yeah. Hello. Just gotta connect to my internet real quick. Alright, so. Hey, man, show me some stupid notifications. Alright.
Of course, since they knew where I lived, and that my father was in no position to do anything about it, I was one of the first to be taken from my village.
I gotta mute myself. Y'all go ahead and continue watching. I gotta do something.
There was nothing but darkness. There were 5 armed men total. They all had their faces covered, and just stood there with their weapons ready. If I had to guess, they were waiting for their leader to come out and give us the initiation speech. Looking around, I was definitely the oldest of the 7 boys that were there. Because of my past experiences with the Taliban, I knew that these men were not the good guys. They may have prayed to the same God as me, but they were ruthless and brutal to their countrymen. I was at the very end of the line. Directly behind me was the cave entrance. So I made a split-second decision and made a break for it. I ran full speed into the dark cave, hearing angry shouting from behind me. I ran past the supply crates and further into the cave. The passage narrowed as I moved forward. I heard the truck reposition. The headlights were now aimed directly at the cave's entrance. I eventually entered an open cavern area. I could hear the men behind me, so using what little light I had, I hid behind a rock formation that was beside the opening and waited for my pursuers. 2 of the armed men eventually entered the cavern. I heard one of them saying that if they found me, they would just put a bullet in my head for causing trouble. I peeked my head out from behind my hiding spot to see an AK-47 pointed directly at my face. One of the men had found me. He shouted at me to stand up, and as soon as I did, we both heard a loud scream coming from the other side of the cavern. I only caught a quick glimpse of what was happening. The other man was on the ground.
Pause it real quick, because I really can't even see nothing. Like, you know how bright this screen I gotta put on? Because I can't see nothing.
Thrashing violently. He was completely covered, head to toe, by enormous spiders. Without exaggeration, these spiders had to be the size of house cats. And there were hundreds of them, crawling all over him. The man who discovered me quickly turned around and gasped at the horrifying sight. I took this opportunity to flee. There was no way I was going further into that cavern, so I used the headlights that were still pointed at the cave's entrance to make my way back out. As I ran, I heard the sounds of gunfire, shortly followed by more screaming. As I neared the cave's opening, the headlights quickly vanished, leaving me in complete darkness. This was the absolute worst time to be in the dark. I made my frantic exit from the cave, just in time to see the taillights of the truck as it sped off. The other boys and the remaining Taliban fighters were gone. They may have thought that what was happening in the cave was an attack by the Americans, and decided to cut and run. I was now scared out of my wits, and I had no idea where I was. And even worse, I was now terrified that these humongous spiders would emerge from the cave and devour me. There was one path through a rock formation that the truck had driven through, and that was the only way I could take. I remember thinking that these spiders could jump on top of me at any moment, so I ran as fast as I could. As soon as I cleared the rocks, I could see the lights of my village in the distance. It took me about 2 hours to reach the town, but I thankfully made it back in one piece. In the time that I was gone, American troops had taken over my village. I was stopped by soldiers and was taken to an interpreter for questioning. I was more than happy to tell them where the Taliban was hiding, and after a while, they eventually dropped me off at my house. My mother was overjoyed to see that I was still alive.
It's like that one movie.
When I think back to this experience, I don't
know what that movie called, but it was just like that movie. It's like, they had to find their daughter because the big spider thingy, because she went somewhere and then that was looking for her or something.
Still say with 100% certainty, what scared me the most was not the armed men who broke into my home and took me from my family. It was what dwelled in that cave.
Yep, just like the movie. Alright. I mean, I might want to watch a little bit. What is this?
Back, it was totally crazy. I was circling about with my hips crammed in a tube carelessly. I was in a situation where I might die right away if the tube flips, but I was just looking up at the sky and thinking that the clouds were pretty at that time. Then, suddenly, the center of my swim tube was shaken a little bit. That was the moment. A girl who looks like a middle school student suddenly grabbed my arm. Her lips looked slightly purple, as if she had been playing in the water for a long time. Then she smiled and said, as if she was reassuring me, "You're gonna fall off. Grab it tightly." She looked kinda older than me, and I was just excited about the thing that she's gonna stay and play with me for a while. So I grabbed the tube and then I swam with her. While she dragged my tube, I couldn't even realize what time it is now. I had so much fun with her. About an hour later, she started to take me to a shallow place near the riverside. "It's going to be cold soon. I'll take you to the adults," she said. But at that moment, my grandmother suddenly screamed and kept shouting my name. She was very old and she didn't even come into the water, but she hurriedly came into the water with her socks on, and she lifted me up and then ran out. "Grandma, what's wrong? What happened?" I shouted. But as soon as I came out of the water, my family tried to cover my eyes so I couldn't see the valley. And my grandma was crying while saying that I was possessed by a ghost. I remember going to a temple or shaman's house for a while after that. A few years later, I asked my grandmother what happened that day, and what she told me was a pure shock. The moment my grandmother looked at the valley to see if I was playing well alone, she saw that I was talking to myself while giggling, and something black got stuck at the end of my tube and was wobbling together. Wondering what I was so funny about, she put glasses on to see me and that black thing. And at that moment, she saw that I was swimming around holding someone's black and long hair. Her heart sank, and as she decided to approach me quickly, she then saw the dead body slowly coming up. That's why she ran towards me. Now that I think about it, that memory didn't scare me at all, literally. However, I still can't forget the faces of those adults who saw the scene.
This story is about my grandfather's experience. He died a long time ago. After he was declared dead at the hospital, we took the body home and put it in his room because my grandmother wanted to see him a little more before saying goodbye to her husband. But then, something happened. 2 days later, the room door suddenly opened and my grandfather crawled out asking for water. Literally, my grandmother and all of the aunts just fainted, and only my uncles and my mom were barely awake. And I was just staring at this weird sight because I was too young at the time. I gave my grandfather a whole body massage after I brought him water, and on that day, the house was in chaos. A few months later, I went to my grandparents' house again, and he was so lively that I couldn't believe that he's the one who once died. One day I was sitting with my grandfather eating ice cream, and he started to tell me a story. On that day, my grandfather woke up in the hospital, and he noticed that everyone was crying. He asked them why they were crying, but no one answered, so he was just standing there. And then a man in a black suit called him outside the hospital room. Without time to think, he began following him, and he started to feel a little bit sad rather than scared. The crying sound from behind gradually decreased, and as he walked along with the man, he could see the village where he used to live as a child. There was a river at his feet that he had never seen before, and the river was really, really red. So he got goosebumps. The man was walking on the surface of the water, and he pressed my grandfather to come over quickly. So the moment he tried to follow him, he was also walking on the water. After crossing the river, he then saw a black wooden structure long past the wasteland. When he was about to pass the gate, a woman in black mourning came out from the inside and kicked him out, saying, "No, you brought the wrong person. If you want to live another 3 years of your life, go and ignore everyone you meet. Do not look back. Just follow the four-legged animal." The woman said like this and disappeared into the house with the man. So my grandfather was going back the way he came. And then he saw one of his friends who had died a few years ago standing there. He beckoned him to come closer, but my grandfather ignored him, thinking what the woman had said just before, even if his friend cursed at him. After that, he met other friends, but he ignored all of them and just passed by. The moment he arrived at the river again, there was a bridge that was not there before. At that moment, he saw his daughter, who had died of fever when she was young, standing in front of the bridge. He could not ignore his daughter. So he approached, and she stretched out her hand as if she wanted him to hold it for her. As soon as he was about to hold that hand, something pulled on his legs. When he looked down, he saw a white dog that had been raised by him a long time ago, was biting his pants and dragging frantically as if he should not hold that hand. It's like he was telling him to cross the bridge immediately. He stepped back from his daughter quickly, and that was the moment when she suddenly rushed to him. Her mouth almost ripped to the ear, and she repeated like this, "I'm going to catch you. I'm going to take you." She was running toward him with a rope in her hand, and it was horrifying. He started to run toward the bridge, and the dog was barking at the ghost and guarded behind him. As soon as he crossed the bridge, that thing vanished with loud crying, and the dog was still barking as if he was telling him to hurry. He looked back when he was far away from the bridge, and then realized that the river, the bridge, the neighborhood, and the dog were all gone. The surrounding area was as white as a sheet. It was the moment when he finally opened his eyes, and he found himself lying in his bed. Grandfather also told this story to his local friends, and the oldest man told him a story that had been told by a shaman. There's a ghost that brings the dead who met with violent death, and he suggested that the ghost that Grandfather saw seemed to be that kind of type. If ghosts lack a place to live in the afterlife, they would take the dead to build a new house. Anyway, after that, my grandfather lived really well for the rest of the 3 years, as the woman in the dream had said, and then he passed away while taking a nap on the same day he first died, 3 years ago. After that, I kept recalling my grandfather's lonely face while he told me his story at that time. My grandfather was not the type who originally believed in ghosts. While he was alive, he always cut the weeds around the grave and brought some drinks and snacks for the grave's owners whenever he saw the ownerless graves around his town. This, of course, is just my grandfather's very personal experience. So it's okay to think of it as just a novelty story, because he told me exactly the same thing. I guess he absolutely went to heaven, but I just miss my grandfather.
Oh, that was before, like, when he was in the hospital. I guess he was dreaming about something. But that was a good story, though. I ain't gonna lie. My dad, bitch. Alright. I'm in this video right here. Make sure you guys hit that like button. Yeah. And see y'all later. Love y'all. Peace.